Now, joining us right now is Congressman Randy Weber. And Congressman Weber, welcome back to the George Jarkesy Show.
Yeah, thank you, George. I appreciate that. Appreciated you having me the first time. Thanks for having me back.
I can't imagine a Congress that hit the ground with more on your plate. I mean,
that's absolutely the case, George. Many of my constituents ask me during the fiscal cliff, or what I call the fiscal clock discussion, they ask me, do you wish that they would take care of that before you get sworn in on January the 3rd? And I said, well, that depends on how they do it. If they do it, the way it needs to be done, absolutely, that'd be fine. But if not, just like you said, George, let me roll up my sleeves, get there, and go to work.
I mean, the president has come out, and he came out and said things to the effect that that the Republicans would slow down growth, they would tip us into recession if they didn't just give him the increase on the debt ceiling.
Well, it's nothing new to me, George, being in the state legislature. I'm used to the rhetoric that comes out like that. If you listen to the other side, they basically say it's give us more money. If you don't, bad things will happen. It's your fault. It's never about the spending, the out-of-control deficit, the way that they manage the budget, or as I would say, don't manage a budget. It's just give us more money.
If you look at the polls are all north of 70%. That American people think that we're spending, as a country, spending too much money. This is a president who's never passed a budget, and once again saying that he's going to circumvent Congress if they don't do what he says he wants it done.
George, it's the height of hypocrisy when Senator Reid proclaimed the week between Christmas and New Year's that he didn't see how the representatives in the House could live with their consciences because they wouldn't come back in and pass a budget, by the way, the budget that they wanted within that 1 week period, that it was a travesty. And I thought, my gosh, how hypocritical is that? Because here's a Senate, a president that hasn't passed a budget in three and a half years, 3 years and some change. And the Republican-controlled House of Representatives won't just lay down, play dead while they continue their spending spree. And they want to say that it'll be because of us, that there's bad things that happen, and has nothing to do with their spending.
How do the Republicans work to unify what the people want, which the majority of people thinks that there's too much government spending, with what the Republicans are trying to get done, which is some kind of commitments long-term of spending reduction?
That might be part of the problem, George, commitments for long-term spending reduction. You give us the reductions in spending and the tax cuts now to help stimulate this economy, and then we might talk about increasing the debt ceiling. But they've had it backwards for too long, and we've got a $16 trillion debt to prove it.
Lately here it's this wait till the last minute, jam it through because nobody could agree, and then everybody wakes up the next day kind of hungover. What do we pass?
I tell you, George, that is their business as usual tact. And unfortunately for us, it is killing business as usual for the rest of the country. That probably one of the best approaches to providing that stability was to get Congress out of the habit of deficit spending.
How do you feel about a balanced budget amendment?
We know that it can be done. I like the idea of a balanced budget amendment. Unfortunately, that would take several years to get through, and I'm not sure that we have the time. What I like to tell people is that we need to cut up Congress's credit card right now. We're asking families to live within a budget. We're asking families to cut back. These spending policies that the Congress, especially the administration, has had in place has run us up to an all-time high deficit. We're asking our American citizens and taxpayers to do with less. By golly, Congress, the president, the administration should have to do the same thing. I don't know that we have the 4 or 5 years to get an amendment through.
How difficult is it to operate under that? Because what we're told out of Washington is it's impossible. But the Texas legislature has done it every other year. Was it in the original Constitution?
Original Constitution. And let me just tell you, George, as a former state rep, it's hard. It's difficult. We had to prioritize. We had to set limits, guidelines, boundaries. We had people come into my office that will say, we know you guys need to cut. Please, our program is important, and whatever you do, don't cut our program. The truth of the matter is you have to roll up your sleeves. You have to double your resolve. You have to say we're going to make the hard, tough choices. The people in my district elected me with the mandate to go to Washington, D.C. to cut spending. They don't want this madness of going over the fiscal cliff, or fiscal clock as I call it, to continue. They want government to decrease in size, not grow in size. We must roll up our sleeves, go to work, and just demonstrate the political will and the resolve to get this done.
This $1 trillion idea for the coin, are you hearing much about that inside the Beltway there?
I'm not hearing much about that, George. I don't know if you have kids or not. We had 3 kids, and now we've got 4 grandkids. But growing up, you know, they'd look at Mom and say, Mom, we want to buy this or buy that. And you say, honey, we don't have the money for that. And, of course, the kids would always look at you and say, well, Mom, just write a check. And that's what this president's been doing. No one has explained to me how that helps the job creators deal with higher taxes, higher regulations, more red tape, an attitude around the country that we don't know what's coming next, and everybody's kind of holding their breath. Nobody wants to risk their venture capital because of this spendthrift in the White House that keeps spending us into oblivion. So I'm just not sure that the very fact that they would mint a $1 trillion coin and then put it on deposit, I mean, what does that explain to me what that does for us? I think it's a pie in the sky kind of a plan, hoping that somehow people will get their confidence back. And I own an air conditioning company, 31 years. I've created jobs, and I do run my business on a budget. It is balanced. And I look at that and I say, that's poppycock. That's pie in the sky.
I don't like the fact that this president refuses to work with Congress.
Well, you know, apparently he didn't take Government 101, 3 branches of government, legislative, judiciary, executive. He thinks he has the power to do it all on his side. It's a sad day for the American public. He needs, as a former con law professor, I think he needs some remedial training in the Constitution.
They're expecting the new numbers to come out on regulatory burden in our economy, somewhere north of $2 billion a year. Where do you stand on this regulatory burden here in our country?
Government is out of control. I can point from being on the Environmental Regulatory Committee in the state legislature and being on the Energy Council, where we traveled around the country and talked about best energy policies and practices. EPA, DOE, the big agencies are actually producing work for companies that cost them in their bottom line, like you alluded to. It makes them jump through hoops. It makes them do things. It puts off permits for 1 to 2 years, takes 2 or 3 years. If you're a venture capitalist, you're looking at your money and you're saying, do I want to invest in this project, or there's a project, and pick a country, Mexico, India, China, down South America, doesn't matter, where my money is going to go to work quickly, I'm going to get a return quicker, there's not the job-killing regulations. Where do you think those people are going to go? They're going to go to those other countries. It is costing the American taxpayer every single day in so many ways, this large government that is overburdening businesses with regulations. It's unnecessary, and we're paying the price. And then you have people that say, well, jobs aren't growing as fast. I wonder why that is.
Congressman Randy Weber, listen, it's been a real pleasure.